Rain waited on the ridge like a hunter with time to spare. The two-lane road below held a single bike with a back tire that sagged like a wounded thing. Walter stepped out of the shallow ditch where he had been pulling weeds and listened to the wind scrape over the grass. He should have turned back to the gate. His knees had spoken enough for one day. The house behind him did not argue. Houses do not argue when one voice lives inside them. The rider tried a hand pump that did nothing. He looked left, then right, the way people look when they do not want to ask for help. Walter crossed the road anyway. The rider lifted his head, face smudged, jaw set, eyes throwing sparks that came from frustration rather than temper. "Bad patch," Walter said. "You can press all day and it will only sigh." The rider blinked. "I will pay for a tow. My wallet is thin, but I will find a way." "That tire does not need a truck," Walter said. "It needs hands." He set his satchel in the gravel, eased down slow, and pressed his thumb around the bead. The rubber had taken a nail, not a screw, which meant a clean wound and a straight path. He took out a tiny kit with a tube of old glue that still knew its job. The rider watched without questions, which Walter liked, because questions slow people down when time grows short. A distant roll of thunder told them both how short. "You know bikes," the rider said. "I know machines that carry men," Walter said. "I prefer men to reach home." They worked without talk for a while. The road smelled like wet dust. The fields held still. When the patch set, Walter checked the rim and found a bite that did not look fresh. He straightened it with a wrapped wrench, gentle and steady, like a man coaxing a bent knuckle back into line. The rider breathed out when the tire took shape again, then breathed in when Walter stood and the world tilted under the old man for one beat. Walter steadied himself with a palm on the seat and a small nod that said it was nothing, though his face gave away more. "I can ride to town and bring you back anything you need," the rider said. "Food, medicine, cash. Say the word." Walter wiped the wrench on a square of cloth that had once been a shirt and now was a memory with edges. "You can ride," he said. "That is what I need." The rider looked at the satchel when Walter opened it to put the kit away. A glint lived inside, dull gold with scratches that lined up like years. The rider's breath hitched the way a person breathes when he sees a face from a photograph he thought he would never meet. Walter closed the satchel and snapped the brass clasp. The sound was small, but the rider flinched. It was not the flinch of fear. It was the flinch of a man who has just recognized a bridge he had sworn did not exist. "What do they call you?" Walter asked. "Mason," he said a little too fast. "Mason Cole." Walter offered his hand. Mason took it. Grease met callus and made old peace. A gust pushed the grass flat and made the first drops fall, slow and cold, spaced like a count. "You should go," Walter said. "The road gets slick, and you do not want company you did not invite." Mason did not mount the bike. He looked over Walter's shoulder at the gate and the small blue card pinned there with a pushpin. It was a delivery slip. Red ink said that a parcel had come and gone. Red ink said to call. Red ink often speaks like a bill collector who likes his work. "Do you expect something?" Mason asked. "Nothing that would make my day better," Walter said. Mason swallowed a thought. He pulled a pen and a receipt stub from his jacket, scribbled a number, and folded it twice. He handed it over and kept his eyes down while he did it. "If the tire sags again, call me," he said. "I have friends who ride with tools." Walter tucked the stub into his shirt pocket without looking. Numbers can wait. Eyes cannot. He watched Mason swing a leg over the bike, test the seal, and start the engine. The sound rose clean and then settled into a low pulse that would sweep the road like a broom. Mason lifted 2 fingers in a small salute that looked old for a young man, then rolled away. Walter crossed back to his gate and took the card. The rain arrived proper, not angry, but committed. He looked at the box for sender and saw a law firm name that had lived in his life, once the way smoke lives in old curtains. The card said that an envelope required signature. It said the courier would try again tomorrow. Lawyers have a way of arriving even when you do not sign for them. He let himself into the yard. The path to the porch cut between flower beds gone half wild. A frame sat on the mantel that held no photo. Guests used to ask about it when guests existed. He always said the same thing. The right picture had not found him yet. Some things go into frames only when both sides agree. He set water on the stove for tea and felt the weight of the satchel against his hip, heavier now that Mason had seen what slept inside. He sat at the table and opened the bag. The metal looked back with a face that many men wore, and some did not survive. The ribbon had faded. The pin held firm. The number on the back was clean where his thumb had polished it for years without thinking. He did not love the metal. He loved what it kept alive. He closed the flap and fastened it again. Headlights slid across the kitchen wall. Tires crunched on the wet gravel. He raised the blind a finger's width and saw a sedan with mirrors that looked like ears listening for lies. Two men inside wrote in small notebooks. They did not look like Rain had a say in their plans. Walter let the blind fall and stood very still. Standing still can change how people see you when they look through glass. The knock on the door was the kind that sounds like the person on the other side already owns the wood. Walter opened it halfway. The men stood with badges that gave them names and a right to ask questions. They said his full name with neat diction and looked past his shoulder at the mantel. One of them smiled at the empty frame as if it had told him a secret. "Mr. Kessler," the taller one said, "we need to speak about an object in your possession and a young man you met today." Walter said nothing. Silence can serve as a test. The tall one kept speaking. He named the metal and named a number that matched the one on the back. He named Mason's bike and plate. He named the county docket and a petition that would be filed in the morning. He named Walter's land as if it were already a line item. "We will need you to bring the metal to the courthouse at 9, he said. "It is relevant to a chain of title dispute. There is concern that it was pledged as collateral at some point in the past." Walter let the words sit in the air and lose heat. He felt the house lean to listen, as old houses do when history tries the latch. The shorter man tried to look past him again, toward the mantel and the frame. Walter shifted 1 inch and blocked the view. Small motions can draw borders. "I am not in the habit of lending the dead the power to take from the living," Walter said. "You can serve me if you must. I will read what you bring. Reading never killed a man. Signing sometimes has." The tall one did not smile. He nodded in a way that meant the game would continue tomorrow with a judge to hold the whistle. They left a card that absorbed rain before Walter closed the door. He listened to the sedan roll away and tracked the sound until it merged with the weather. The kettle rattled. He poured into a cup that had a chip on the rim that always found his lip unless he paid attention. He set the cup down and took the receipt stub from his pocket. The number that Mason had written visible on the top line. The last name he had scribbled was not Cole. The last name belonged to the founder of the firm that had just sent the car to his gate. Walter sat very straight and let his breath find its way through the room. On the table lay a pen, the delivery card, the satchel, and a tiny dark smear from the tire patch glue that looked like a road on a map. He could walk that road in either direction. One led to court with nothing in hand but a medal and a story that the other side would twist until the shape broke. The other led to a fence on the back acre where a cedar grew crooked with age, and where a young man once dug a box because an older man had told him to hide something until he came back. Rain against the window found a rhythm like marching done by boots that would never wear out. Walter reached for the satchel. The clasp clicked. Metal whispered against leather. He slid the metal into his breast pocket where men have tucked letters when they did not know if the day would let them write an answer. He blew out the lamp in the front room and left the kitchen light on. From the porch, he could see the gravel shining like fish scales and the gate hanging open a finger's width like a mouth about to speak. He stepped into the rain and did not bother with a hat. The back path to the cedar would not be long if his legs remembered the old bargain he had made with them. He closed the gate behind him and set the latch. The road in front of the house lay empty for now. Out past the bend, a single headlight rose, fell, and rose again, steady as a promise that had taken its time to return. The rain eased before midnight, leaving the road glazed like an old photograph. Walter sat at the table where the kettle had gone cold. The house listened to the ticking of the wall clock the way a courtroom listens for a verdict. The slip of paper Mason had given him lay beside the metal. He read the number again. The digits were steady, the handwriting careful, but the signature beneath them changed shape halfway through. Mason Coleman. Earlier, the biker had called himself Mason Cole. It could have been nothing. Old habits of caution told Walter that names rarely changed by accident. The small difference carried the scent of paperwork and disguise. He had worn names once too, not for lying, but for survival. A war file still sat somewhere under his own first name with a letter missing. That missing letter had once saved his life. He folded the note and placed it under the cup. If Mason had written 2 names, one belonged to the truth and one to protection. Either way, It tied the young man to something that watched its own tracks. Outside, an engine grumbled. Not the sedan from earlier. Lower, rougher, maybe a truck with more weight than need. Headlights swept the gate again. Walter rose and turned off the kitchen light. Darkness had a way of protecting men who had nothing left to hide except where they stood. The vehicle passed without stopping. Gravel spat, then silence. He waited until the sound thinned before opening the door. The gate had moved again, opened just wide enough for a letter to slide through. The red delivery slip still hung there, but something new clung to it. A second paper, damp, edges curled, printed in the same firm's typeface. Notice of intent to redeliver. Parcel held pending verification of recipient signature. He read the line twice. Verification meant signature comparison. That meant someone had already signed his name. The air pressed heavier. He locked the gate and went back inside. Sleep would not come, so he boiled fresh water. The cup steamed. He stared into it, until his reflection broke into rings. At dawn, the clouds tore open. Mist rolled off the fields and left silver webs across the fence line. Walter stepped outside to check the mailbox and found nothing except a single motorcycle track leading from the bend to his gate and away again. Fresh tread, clean edges. Mason had returned in the night, or someone who rode his kind of machine. He followed the track a few paces down the lane, far enough to see where it vanished into harder ground. His hip began to ache, a familiar reminder of shrapnel that the surgeons had removed in pieces. Pain was honest. It told him he was still part of the story. He turned back toward the porch and saw a scrap of cloth pinned to the gatepost. It was a handkerchief, soaked and torn, with the same eagle crest printed faintly on one corner, the mark he had glimpsed under Mason's jacket. He took it down. The cloth smelled of oil and iron. Across the bottom edge, written in smeared ink, was a single word, wait. The handwriting matched the note on his table. He pocketed the cloth, heart knocking once against the ribs and then settling. Waiting was something he had done all his life, for orders, for letters, for peace that never stayed. Mid-morning brought the hum of engines again, not one this time, but many. Walter stood at the window as a convoy of motorcycles swept past the gate in tight formation. Chrome flared, mudguards caught light. Jackets bore the same crest as the handkerchief. None of them slowed. They moved like scouts marking territory before the main force. The last rider turned his head as he passed. For a heartbeat, Walter thought it was Mason, but the visor hid too much. A gloved hand tapped the helmet twice, an old military signal meaning acknowledged. Then they were gone, engines fading toward the courthouse road. He felt both guarded and targeted. A convoy does not ride that clean without purpose. He went inside and opened the satchel again. The metal lay in its cloth wrap. He traced the number on the back. If that number had become part of a title record, someone had fed it to a database that never should have known it existed. That required access, lawyers, and motive. He began to suspect that Mason had not stumbled onto the road by accident. The phone on the wall buzzed once. No ring, just a faint electric click. Lines in this county did that sometimes when someone tested the circuit from another end. He lifted the receiver. Only static waited there. He hung up slowly, careful not to let it slam. He wrote the events down in a small notebook he kept for memory's sake. 6:45 p.m., biker, Mason Cole. Fixed tire. Metal scene. 9:30 p.m., car from firm. Badge inspection. Midnight, truck sound. Gate open, new notice left. Dawn, bike track, crest handkerchief, word wait. 10:15 a.m., convoy of approximately 12 riders heading east. He underlined the word wait twice and closed the book. At noon, the postman came on foot. No parcel, only a copy of the county bulletin folded tight. Walter almost thanked him and sent him off, but then a headline caught his eye. Historic land claims to be reviewed, veteran documentation requested. The article named the same law firm that had visited him. It spoke of metal numbers being used to verify ownership of property granted under old federal acts. So that was it. The metal was not about honor. It was about leverage. Whoever controlled the proof of service could validate or erase ownership of land granted to veterans. He had seen such schemes before, quiet confiscations under the flag of legality. He folded the paper, slid it under the satchel strap, and stared through the window again. The road lay empty, but he sensed the story circling him like thunder that chooses when to strike. Somewhere beyond those fields, Mason was either running from the same people or standing with them. Walter poured another cup of tea and sat down to wait, just as the note had said. Waiting was never simple. It tested what a man believed about the value of patience and the price of truth. The clock ticked past 3 when a shadow crossed the porch. A child from the neighbor's farm dropped a small envelope through the mail slot and ran back to his bicycle. Inside was the red delivery card he had signed weeks ago for a package that never came. Across it, in hurried ink, someone had written, "Do not trust the seal." He looked toward the cedar fence at the back acre. The wind had shifted there, pulling the branches east. The storm would return soon. He slipped the card into his pocket next to the cloth and the metal. Names might not match, but warnings often did. He sat back and let the last light fade from the kitchen wall. Somewhere down the road, engines stirred again, softer this time, as if they were waiting for his answer. The courier arrived at noon, his raincoat glossy with the leftovers of a passing drizzle. He did not make eye contact, only extended a clipboard with a practiced motion. Walter signed the line and received a thick envelope sealed in wax. The emblem pressed into it matched the watermark he had seen before, the eagle crest. He thanked the courier, though the man was already walking back toward the van. Inside, the envelope carried a letter on ivory paper and a folded notice with numbers that pretended to be polite. The header read, "Notice of Corrective Action, Real Property Title Adjustment." The letter claimed that Walter's property deed, recorded 70 years ago, contained clerical discrepancies regarding military service verification. It went on to state that the firm, acting on behalf of an unnamed client, intended to seek corrective relief through injunction. The phrases were clean, professional, and sharp enough to draw blood. Walter read it twice, slower the second time. He had seen such language before during his years of military administration. Words like corrective relief often meant the law would take what men refused to sell. He laid the notice on the table beside his notebook. Every letter in the firm's name seemed to stare at him, each one an accusation. The word service verification stayed on his tongue like metal. That meant one thing, the metal. Someone had tied the number stamped on its back to a property record. He took the metal from its cloth pouch, turned it in his palm, and traced the digits, 71,492K. The ink on the notice listed a matching number under document reference. His gut tightened. They had not guessed. They had looked it up. A knock rattled the doorframe before he could think further. Not sharp this time, but steady, official. He opened the door to find a woman holding a tablet and wearing a badge clipped to her coat pocket. The tag read County Records Office, Assistant Clerk. "Mr. Kessler?" she asked. He nodded. "My supervisor sent me." The firm requested a duplicate title extract. "Standard procedure, but something about your file stood out. It is old, very old, and there are sealed attachments." "Sealed by whom?" She hesitated. "By federal orders, sir. The original deeds for veteran homestead grants are sealed under wartime confidentiality. Only a court can open them now. Yet someone has them," he said. Her eyes flicked to the satchel beside his chair. "They have numbers, not papers. Someone cross-referenced your service citation with the metal registry. It appears in the file as proof of grant. That should not be possible unless the records were digitized illegally." Walter felt the room tilt slightly, the way it had tilted once in battle when the ground split beneath him. "Then they forged the link." "Possibly," she said. "But there is a motion scheduled for next week. They claim you never completed the final land confirmation in 1954. They will argue abandonment. The judge will likely issue a temporary injunction." She leaned closer, lowering her voice. "Off the record, you should bring counsel." "I cannot afford counsel." "Then bring proof," she said. "Anything showing continued possession. Tax receipts, photographs, even letters." Her tone carried more concern than duty. She left a printed docket slip on the table and turned toward the door. Before stepping outside, she looked back. "If they mention the metal, do not hand it over without a warrant. That number should never have left a military archive." The door closed softly behind her. Walter stood still, listening to the echo fade into the hall. He had lived long enough to know when the law was about to pretend to be fair. He sat, pulled his ledger from the drawer, and began listing what proof he still had. The original deed, his wife's will, tax stubs, and the field journal that his old commander had signed on discharge day. The pen scratched slow but steady. When he finished, he poured another cup of tea. The clock struck 2. Outside, clouds gathered again, heavier this time, as though they were reading the notice too. By late afternoon, his mailbox clanged again. A new envelope slid through the slot, thinner, but from the same firm. This one contained only a single page. It read, "In preparation for the hearing, please produce the item designated metal hashtag 71492K, as its verification supports your title rights. Failure to produce may result in assumption of forfeiture." He read the line aloud. Assumption of forfeiture. Legal poison, disguised as kindness. They wanted the metal not to protect him, but to complete their case against him. He set the letter beside the first one, both lying like twin threats on the table. The phone rang once. He hesitated before answering. The line hissed faintly. Then a voice. Young, urgent, strained. "Mr. Kessler, this is Mason." Walter did not speak. "They are coming for the metal," Mason continued. "Do not go to the courthouse tomorrow. They will trick you into signing release papers. They need your signature more than the metal." "You used two names," Walter said quietly. "Cole and Coleman. Which one belongs to the truth?" A pause crackled through the wire. "Coleman was my mother's name," Mason said. "She was secretary to the firm's founder. He used her name to register half the land deeds. After she died, they buried the records under her initials. That is why I joined them, to find out how deep it goes." "Then you ride for them and against them both," Walter said. "I tried to warn you with the handkerchief. They know you saw the crest. They have tapped your line now. Burn every notice they send. The only proof that matters is the field map you kept hidden." "There is no map," Walter said, though he knew the cedar fence still guarded something. "Then they will make one for you," Mason said. "One that says you gave up the land years ago." The call cut off with a hollow click. Walter stared at the receiver. The sound of static lingered in the room like smoke. He hung it back on the hook and sat down slowly. He opened his ledger again, tore out the page listing his documents, and slid it under the metal. The ink had not yet dried. The words bled slightly, binding themselves to the ribbon. Outside, thunder rolled low across the fields. He stepped onto the porch and watched dust lift from the road as though something large was approaching. A black SUV came into view, tires grinding against the gravel. Two men stepped out wearing the same coats as before. One held a clipboard, the other an envelope. "Mr. Kessler," the tall one called. "We have a motion signed by Judge Rourke. The court requests temporary custody of any service-related items pending verification." Walter smiled faintly. A judge who signs before sunrise and delivers before dusk must be a busy man. "Compliance will favor your case," the man replied. Walter's smile did not change. "So will memory." He closed the door before they could answer. Through the window, he watched them leave the envelope on the porch rail. The wax seal glistened red in the dim light. He picked it up once the car had gone, broke the seal with his thumb, and read the first line. "Motion filed under County Case Number 62-19, subject property boundaries contingent upon metal verification." At the bottom of the page, just above the signature line, a handwritten note waited in smaller ink, metal number cross-checked and confirmed. "Chain of custody established through Field Citation Archive." The number was his. The war he thought he had left behind had followed him into ink and law. He folded the motion carefully and tucked it inside the satchel next to the metal. The flap clicked shut like a trigger. In the distance, another convoy rumbled across the horizon. The riders were fewer this time, but their engines spoke louder, angrier. Walter watched the clouds swallow them, then looked down at his porch where rain began to fall in deliberate, heavy drops. Old papers had found new enemies, and the war had learned to wear a suit. The knock came while the sky still held night. It was the hard rhythm of men who believed doors should open because they asked. Walter had been awake since the first pale line pressed against the horizon. He did not move at once. He let the second knock fall, then the third. Only after the house had counted for him did he unlatch the chain and open the door the width of his palm. Two uniforms stood on the porch. Not the county clerks from the day before. These wore sidearms and hats beaded with mist. Their belts spoke of authority. Their eyes spoke of errands that did not leave room for doubt. "Mr. Kessler," the taller said. "Deputy Marsh. This is Deputy Lane. We need to ask you a few questions." Walter let the door swing another inch. The wind pushed rain against the sill. The road beyond the gate was a strip of dull silver. Birds had not started yet. That was how early it was. "You may ask," Walter said. Marsh held a small leather notebook. Lane held a folder with a red string wound twice around it. The string looked tight enough to leave a mark. Earlier filings show contact with a motorcyclist named Mason, Marsh said. We have reason to believe he is involved in interference with a court order. Did he give you anything? Did you give him anything? People still trade greetings in this county, Walter said. He had a flat tire. I patched it. He left with the same empty pockets he arrived with. Lane raised his eyes from the folder. Did he see the medal? Walter did not fix his face. Which medal? The one tied to your property file, Lane said. Number ending in K. The chain of custody is under review. Walter watched the rain collect on the brim of Lane's hat until it fell in a slow drop. Words like chain are for iron, not for stories. Marsh did not smile. A creditor has filed notice. They may claim this parcel on the basis of a wartime transfer. If the medal was pledged, even informally, a court can accept that as evidence of encumbrance. You should surrender it for verification so the court can protect your interest. Walter let the sentence sit in the cold air until it lost its polish. Protection that begins with surrender is not protection. Who is the creditor? Lane moved the folder half an inch. An entity represented by halberd and pike. He paused to watch Walter's eyes. You know the firm. I know what a halberd is, Walter said. It is a blade on a pole carried by men who did not like to get close. Marsh took a different line. Did Mason ask you for the medal? Did he touch it? We need to establish whether he has taken possession, even briefly. He touched a wrench, Walter said. He touched gravel. He touched a handkerchief that he left on my gate with the word wait written on it. That is what he touched. Lane lost a fraction of his stillness. You admit contact. Then you understand our concern. The world would be empty if contact proved guilt, Walter said. What does your folder say that you cannot? Lane unwrapped the red string. The paper inside was thin and dense with text. He slid one page forward with 2 fingers, careful like a man feeding a wire into a tight space. This is a notice of potential claim by an unnamed creditor, Lane said. It alleges a wartime transfer of title collateralized by a service medal. The allegation states that your wife, now deceased, accepted funds against this land during your deployment, and that a promissory note was signed with the medal number as reference. The creditor intends to perfect the claim if the number matches. Walter felt the weight of years press across his chest and then lift. He had carried grief and paper both. Paper weighed more. You have a copy of this note. Lane kept his fingers on the page but did not turn it. The note is sealed pending a hearing. Then you do not have a copy, Walter said. You have a whisper in a hall. Marsh changed angles again. We are not here to argue. We are here to warn. If the court accepts the argument, a receiver can take temporary possession of the property while title is cleansed. You may remain during review, but you would not be owner. That can happen by Friday. The word cleanse slid across the floor like oil. Walter felt a memory rise from the deep room where he kept memories that could still bite. He saw a tent with a low light and a table with maps and a colonel with a cold voice. He saw a sheet of paper that moved from one hand to another and never touched the table. He saw a name at the bottom of that sheet. The name of a man who built a law firm after the war and bought men the way a mill buys grain. Lane closed the folder a quarter turn. We need to know where the medal is now. If you keep it, that is your choice. If it goes missing before the hearing, the court will draw its own lines. Lines are easy to draw when you do not plan to walk them, Walter said. Marsh looked past him at the mantel. The empty frame was a square of quiet wood that had grown used to stairs. Marsh looked back. We can bring a warrant for the medal as evidence of identity. That is not a threat. That is a path. A path works both ways, Walter said. You walk in. You walk out. You choose how you remember the steps. Lane tried the practical tone. If the medal proves your record, it helps you. Production supports your position. Production feeds theirs, Walter said. They need a number to make ink look like truth. They already have the number. Now they want my hand on their paper. Marsh shifted his weight. The porch board under his boot creaked. Thin daylight slid over the fields. A crow called in the hedgerow, short and flat, like a gavel without ceremony. One more question, Marsh said. When did you last see Mason? Walter let silence breathe long enough to make both men aware of their own lungs. Then he said, at dusk. He left westbound. Alone? Lane asked. Alone, Walter said. Lane studied him, not with distrust, but with the look of a man who suspects the ground itself is keeping secrets. He opened his mouth to press again. Walter leaned forward so that the rain struck his shoulders, and he spoke a name at a volume that did not carry into the yard. He said it once, with the weight of a year and a place attached to it. He added a date. He added an airfield. He added a coded line that no one outside that circle had ever spoken in daylight. Lane went very still. The wind moved his coat, but not his body. Marsh did not look at Walter. He looked at Lane, because Lane's eyes had told him more than words could. The folder shut with a soft slap. The red string found its path around the paper again. Understood, Lane said, voice lower now. We will note that you are aware of historic parties related to your file. Note that a creditor who uses that name is not a stranger to me, Walter said. Note that any paper tied to that name carries a stain that no court can wash without bringing back men who do not fit in this century. Marsh cleared his throat. We will report that you declined to produce the metal this morning. We will also report that you acknowledged contact with Mason. Report that I make tea at dawn and sleep when I can, Walter said. Report that a man who mended a tire did not ask for anything that a thief would want. Lane set 2 cards on the porch rail. Not a threat now. A courtesy that admitted boundaries. If you see him, call. If anyone attempts to enter this house without your leave, call. Even if they claim to serve the court. Walter slid the cards toward the door with 2 fingers. If a court needs entry, it can speak to me where light is good and ears can hear. They stepped back. The mist had thickened into fine rain. The deputies moved down the steps and across the yard. At the gate, Marsh glanced back once, as if to fix the house in his mind. Then they were gone, tails of their coats lifting and falling with their stride, heads down against the weather. Walter closed the door and set the latch. The house held its breath. He carried the metal from the satchel to the mantel and stood it where the empty frame could look down at it. The ribbon did not shine. It drank the thin light and kept it. He walked to the kitchen, turned the kettle, and watched the blue flame. The whisper of the name still seemed to hang in the room like a held note. Lane had known it. That told Walter everything he needed about the firm, the court, and the way the past had decided to walk back in uniform. Outside, the road woke. Far off to the west, engines rose, not many, but enough to lay a line of sound across the fields. He could not see them yet. He did not need to. He knew the measure of their pace. He knew the way a pack moved when it carried news that would not wait. He lifted the phone, listened to the line, and heard only the faint hum of a circuit that had learned it was not alone. He set it down soft. He poured tea, left it untouched, and looked at the metal on the mantel, then at the empty frame, then at the door. He spoke the name again, barely louder than breath. The house seemed to lean in. The rain answered with a slow, steady tap. The engines drew closer. The petition came wrapped in politeness and glue. A new courier, a new clipboard, the same crest pressed into wax the color of dried berries. Walter signed without flourish and stood on the porch while the van hummed away. The air held that bright chill that visits between storms. He broke the seal with a thumbnail and read standing up, because sitting would have felt like surrender. The heading named the court. The next lines named him. The parcel, the boundaries in rods and chains, the year of first record, and the year of alleged lapse. The heart of it beat in one paragraph. The firm alleged that the deed had been secured by collateral that never belonged to Walter. The metal, they wrote, was government property at time of pledge, therefore any collateral agreement voided itself on contact. The remedy they sought was an injunction, quick and clean, until title could be clarified. He read the line about the metal twice. The number matched. The phrase about government property felt like a hand closing around his pocket. At the bottom, a clerk's stamp fixed a hearing for Thursday at 9, 2 days away. The judge's name sat on the signature line, neat and sure, as if no hand had trembled. He carried the papers inside and laid them on the table. The house fell quiet in the way that houses do when the law walks in. He opened the satchel, set the metal on the wood, and let the ribbon spill. Light found the scratches and made small rivers of metal. He did not touch the pen. He folded the petition instead, then unfolded it, then folded it once more, as if the paper would confess. A shadow crossed the window. Boots on the step. Walter slid the metal back into the satchel and closed the flap. He did not reach for the door at once. 3 knocks, spaced like measured breaths. He opened on the third. Mason stood there with the weather still on his shoulders. His eyes had the look of a man who had not slept, or had slept in a place that does not forgive dreams. He took off his gloves and held them in one hand like a peace flag that no one would accept. They filed it, Mason said. You have the hearing notice. Walter stepped aside. On the table, Mason read the first page fast, then the second, then the third. He did not sit. His jaw set hard at the paragraph about government property. He shook his head. They will tell you to bring the metal, he said. Do not. If you walk in with it, the clerk will log it as evidence, and it will not leave the building. They said production supports my claim, Walter said. They said it because they need your hand to bless their number, Mason said. Once it sits in a plastic bag with a chain barcode, the story becomes theirs. They will cradle it like a newborn and swear the court to its defense. Then why write that it never belonged to me? Walter asked. To cut both ways, Mason said. If you do not bring it, they claim forfeiture by avoidance. If you do, they claim it was barred from pledge, and they keep your land in a freezer while they argue both sides for months. Walter watched Mason's hands. Grease lived at the cuticles, ink lived on the pads. Work and paper, both worn into the skin. You ride with men who can push back, Walter said. Yet you whisper at my door. Mason looked past the table to the mantel, to the empty frame that had learned to stare back. He took a step, stopped, and pulled his jacket closed as if a draft had found him. The leather shifted just enough to show a patch sewn inside the lining. An eagle crest, the same beak and crown, the same stern angle as the watermark that pressed their envelopes. He caught the motion and sealed the jacket with a quick hand. Too late. Walter said nothing. Mason did not pretend he had shown nothing. They sponsored a charity ride last year, Mason said. The patch was handed out behind a tent with a keg and a banner. Back then I thought it was only a rich man's way to feel brave on a Saturday. Men who like poles with blades like to borrow symbols, Walter said. They pay poets to tell them what the symbols mean. Mason nodded once, eyes steady. I took the patch so I could walk past ropes without questions. I kept it because their guards recognize it faster than a driver's license. Then you stand on both banks and call it a bridge, Walter said. How long until the water rises? It is rising now, Mason said. He tapped the petition with 2 fingers. They built this page from a sealed file they had no right to touch. They will swear they found the number in a public ledger. They will hold a photocopy with a black bar covering the name of the source, and the judge will pretend not to mind because he wants the case off his desk. Walter poured tea and did not offer sugar. Mason took the cup, held it, and did not drink. The clerk who came yesterday, Walter said. She told me to bring proof and to keep the metal until a warrant tells me otherwise. She is the only decent voice you will hear in that building, Mason said. Listen to her and live. Live how? Walter asked. With the metal in your pocket and your name on your porch, Mason said. At least until we find the map. That word again, Walter said. You speak of the map the way men speak of a well in drought. It is not faith, Mason said. It is a piece of paper with a shape on it. It shows the original boundary stakes for 10 veteran parcels, laid down by your unit survey. If we show it, their chain breaks. Without it, they will say your line wandered into their field years ago and that you never noticed because you are old and alone. Walter set his cup down. If you know where to dig, say it. Mason glanced at the window as if the glass had ears. I cannot. Not here. Not now. They listen. They count your steps and mine. You brought me counsel and fear, Walter said. You left me with both. What do you take? Mason looked at the satchel. The muscles in his forearm tightened once, then released. I take this thought, he said, that you will not carry the metal into a room where pens are weapons. Promise me. I have made many promises, Walter said. A promise made without ground to stand on is only air. Then stand on the cedar ground, Mason said. If the box is there, you will know before dawn. If the box holds the field map, the hearing becomes a different animal. If it holds nothing, we pivot. You speak like a man who has a plan for every loss, Walter said. I learned it from men who lost other men, Mason said. Yes or no? Will you keep the metal here? Walter opened the satchel, took the metal in his palm, and let the ribbon rest across his fingers. He looked at the number that had followed him from a tent lit by a single bulb to this kitchen lit by an old sky. He closed his hand and put the metal back. I will not bring it, he said. Relief moved through Mason's shoulders and then hid. Because relief is a luxury in a room with windows. He set the cup down untouched and stepped to the door. One more thing, he said. If they send an officer with a warrant, read every word. If the word custody appears without the word temporary, close the door and call the deputies who came at dawn. Lane knows the name you said. Lane will listen. Walter studied Mason's face. There was a boy there under the beard and the road. There was a child who had watched adults trade paper over a coffin. Do you ride for them now? Walter asked. Or for me? I ride for what the land is supposed to mean, Mason said. Men planted fence posts with hands that shook from winter, not from fear. That should count. He reached for the knob. As he did, the jacket gaped again, just enough for the crest to show a second time, brighter in the noon light, bright like a brand. Mason saw Walter see it. He did not look away. They think patches make brothers, Mason said. They forget that brothers are made by what they refuse to sell. He left without noise. His engine started soft, a polite growl that lengthened into a steady line drawn down the lane. Walter followed to the porch and watched the tail light lift over the small dip in the road and vanish at the bend. He went back to the table and read the petition again from the first line to the last. The part about government property gnawed. He took out his ledger and wrote a single sentence under today's date. If the metal never belonged to me, then the land never belonged to them. A car stopped at the gate. Not the van, not a cruiser. A town car with tinted glass. The passenger window slid down a fraction. A hand in a suit sleeve lifted a phone and snapped a picture of the porch. The window rose. The car did not move. Walter lifted the petition in his right hand and the satchel in his left. He stood there in plain view until the car rolled away. On the mantel, the empty frame watched the room. On the table, the seal wax cooled into a dull red coin. The clock marked the hour without apology. The day had cut him a dozen times with paper and ink, and the worst of it was that he could feel each cut long after the blade had gone. Night would bring rain again. The cedar would drink. If the box lay where memory said it did, the earth would give it up honest. If not, the court would take its swing on Thursday, and he would brace for it. He blew out the lamp in the front room, left the kitchen light burning, and set the satchel on a chair near the door. He touched the latch, then took his hand away. He did not pray. He did not curse. He only stood still until the floor under him felt like part of his body again. Engines murmured somewhere out past the bend, not near, not far, like men thinking before they speak. The house breathed with him. The night listened. The paper on the table waited for his next move like a rival who smiles before he bites. The courthouse smelled of varnish and dust, the kind that clings to rooms where arguments have replaced prayer. Walter stood near the back wall, hat in hand, waiting for his name to echo from the clerk's lips. Around him, voices fluttered, lawyers rehearsing civility, clerks shuffling paper, a bailiff checking watches. The air had that hum of performance. The low pulse of people pretending truth has a schedule. When the clerk called Kessler versus unnamed creditor, motion hearing, the room quieted by habit, not respect. Walter walked to the front and felt the floor tilt under his slow step. His boots clicked once for every year he had owned the land. The judge was a man of sharp posture and colder patience. His robe hung like a curtain concealing exhaustion. On the bench before him sat 2 stacks of paper, one thick, one thin. Walter knew which was his. Opposite him, the firm's counsel stood ready. A man younger than Mason, clean jaw, hair slicked into obedience. His suit shone like oiled glass. When he turned toward Walter, his eyes carried no malice, only calculation. That was worse. Malice had limits. Calculation did not. Counsel for petitioner is ready, Your Honor, the lawyer said. We appreciate the court's decision to expedite discovery. The judge nodded, fingers resting on the thin file. Mr. Kessler, you are present without representation? I am present, Walter said. That was not the question, the judge said. I stand without counsel. Yes, Walter replied. The law and I are acquainted, though not friends. A few polite chuckles rippled, then died. The lawyer opened his folder and spoke as if dictating a recipe. This case concerns property registered under Veteran Grant Series 41, Parcel 8. The record suggests collateralization by metals 71492K, which, under statute, constitutes federal property and voids any claim of personal pledge. The judge raised a brow. Collateralization by a metal? Indeed, Your Honor. the lawyer said smoothly. During wartime correspondence, certain beneficiaries used service citations as proof of trustworthiness in exchange for small loans. Our client maintains that such correspondence exists and names the defendant's spouse as signatory. Walter's jaw tightened. The word spouse landed like a gavel of its own. Mr. Kessler, the judge said, do you deny the existence of such correspondence? I deny that any letter signed by my wife carried the weight they claim, Walter said. And I deny that the medal belongs to anyone who never earned it. Possession does not equal ownership, the lawyer said. The item remains federal issue. Its number validates the property record. We simply request temporary custody for verification. Walter looked at him. If you hold it, it will never be temporary. The lawyer smiled faintly, the kind of smile a man uses when he has already planned the next question. Then perhaps you could produce it here today, for the court's record? I brought myself, Walter said. That should suffice. The lawyer moved closer to the bench. Your Honor, the petitioner moves for an order compelling production of medals 71492K and all associated wartime correspondence, personal or official, in the respondent's possession. The judge leaned back, eyes sliding over Walter like a scan. On what basis? Chain of title, Your Honor. Without the medal, the parcel cannot be verified. Discovery of the object is essential to resolve ownership before the injunction hearing. The judge thought a moment. His pen tapped twice against the blotter. Mr. Kessler, do you have in your possession any such item? Walter's voice was quiet, but it carried. Yes. Then you will produce it for review. No, Walter said. A whisper moved through the gallery. The judge's hand froze mid-tap. You refuse a direct order of the court? I refuse to hand my history to men who rent justice by the hour, Walter said. I will bring it when a fair hand holds the docket. The bailiff took one step forward, but the judge lifted a finger to halt him. Mr. Kessler, this is not a negotiation. Neither was the war that earned that medal, Walter said. Yet we fought it anyway. The judge exhaled through his nose, more weary than angry. The court will issue a written order compelling production. You will comply within 48 hours or face contempt. So noted, Walter said. The lawyer moved again, voice softer now. Your Honor, in light of respondent's resistance, I request the court unseal affidavit number WK154, which may clarify his position. Walter's head lifted. Repeat that, he said. The lawyer obliged, savoring each syllable. Affidavit WK154, filed under seal by military order in 1955. The initials stand for Walter Kessler, presumed author. The judge looked down at his docket. Counsel is correct. The affidavit exists. Classified annex, partially redacted, sealed under veteran confidentiality. It was referenced in your grant file, Mr. Kessler. Walter's breath caught, the first betrayal of stillness. He had written something after the war, a statement about land assignments, corruption, a colonel's misuse of funds. He had signed it under duress, believing it would be buried with the files. Apparently, it had not been buried deep enough. Your Honor, Walter said, that affidavit is sealed for reasons that outlived its author's rank. Yet it bears your name, the judge said. It may be germane. It names men who are dead and one who is not, Walter said. If you unseal it, you hand those ghosts to lawyers who sell them by the line. The judge studied him. That sounds like guilt. It sounds like memory, Walter said. The difference is in who listens. The judge hesitated, then turned to the lawyer. Motion to unseal is taken under advisement. For now, it remains closed. But the existence of the document is noted for discovery. Murmurs rippled again. Mason sat 3 rows behind, hat pulled low, eyes fixed on the floor. Walter saw him in the reflection of the railing. The man did not move, not even when the lawyer shifted the argument toward tax liens and missed filings. The hearing droned for another half hour. Each sentence drew paper cuts, each exhibit another drop. Walter answered questions with brevity that passed for calm. The judge watched, occasionally nodding, occasionally frowning, like a teacher marking essays already doomed by grammar. When it ended, the judge summarized with mechanical rhythm. Petitioner's motion to compel discovery is granted. Respondent shall produce medals 71492K, all correspondence, and any records of veteran claim within 48 hours. Failure to comply will result in contempt and possible seizure pending verification. Walter nodded once. The gavel fell, light but final. The room emptied in orderly rustle. Mason remained seated until the lawyer passed him. Then he rose, slipping through the aisle like a shadow that did not belong to the light. Walter met him near the back door. They mentioned a sealed affidavit. Walter said quietly, "Filed under my initials." Mason's eyes met his, full of warning. Then the game just changed. That file ties you to the men who built the firm. If they unseal it, they can rewrite who owned what after the war. Then they already have my words, Walter said. They have them. They do not have what you meant, Mason said. Not yet. Outside, the sky burned gray with pending rain. The courthouse steps glistened. Walter looked down them and saw his reflection in the wet stone, older, smaller, but unbroken. They gave me 48 hours, he said. Use them, Mason replied. After that, paper will own everything that breathes. Walter adjusted his hat and stepped into the rain. Behind him, the courthouse doors closed like the lid of a box meant to keep truth from daylight. The engines waiting at the curb started together, a sound of men aligning their next move. Somewhere, in a locked archive, a sealed envelope waited. Its corner bore faded ink. Affidavit WK 154. The loop was tightening, and Walter knew. His own handwriting was about to stand witness against him. The deposition room held stale air and the faint scent of toner. A camera watched from a tripod. A court reporter sat ready with a small machine that ate words and turned them into lines no one read until it was too late. Walter sat straight, hands folded, eyes on the center of the table, not on the lawyer across from him. The lawyer wore a suit that looked pressed by someone who pressed people for a living. He smiled without warmth. State your name for the record. Walter Kessler. Age. 92. Do you understand that you are under oath? I do. The lawyer lifted a slim binder. Each tab had a date. Each date was a net. Mr. Kessler, you have kept numerous items from your service. Medals, letters, maps, tools, ration books, lapel pins, and what you once described in a letter as small things that hold big days. Would you agree that you are a collector? I am a keeper, Walter said. There is a difference. The lawyer did not pause. A keeper. Of objects. Some would call that sentimental. Some would say those objects fill space that should be reserved for lawful records. Some would say that a keeper can cloud a title by introducing a trinket that never belonged in a land file. Do you see how that appears? I see that words can be sharpened until they draw blood, Walter said. Please keep to yes or no where possible, the lawyer said. You have a service medal numbered 71492K. Yes. You kept this medal for decades. Yes. Did you ever use it as collateral? No. Did your spouse? No. Did you permit anyone to list the number on any form regarding this land? No. The lawyer slid a photo across the table. It showed the mantle and the empty frame, with the medal below it. This is your home. Yes. You display the medal where visitors can see it. I display memory where I can reach it. The lawyer turned a page. A new exhibit. A letter in a careful hand. Ink faded. A crease once folded with love and later with grief. This is a letter from your late wife, dated 1954, 6 months before the final title confirmation. Please read the last line. Walter read it in silence. The room fell away. He heard her voice with its steady music. He saw her hand on paper, index finger bent, just so from years of sewing. The last line said, I kept the medal safe for the house, and the house safe for the medal. The lawyer tapped that sentence. Would you agree that this can be read to mean that she used the medal in the interest of the house? It can be read to mean that she kept both safe, Walter said. Which one did she use to protect the other? She used her life, Walter said. The lawyer did not look moved. He pushed. Please answer the question. She used the truth, Walter said. She did not pledge what was not hers to pledge. So this sentence has two meanings. It has one heart, Walter said. You are trying to cut it in half. The court reporter glanced up, then down again. The camera lens stared without judgment. The lawyer slid a second page from the binder. It held a grainy copy of a postcard, stamped and addressed, with a line in a different ink at the bottom. The lawyer pointed. This annotation was added by a clerk at the time of filing, he said. It reads, verified by medal on hand. Who had the medal on hand? That word could mean model, Walter said. Clerks miswrite. Do you deny that your wife brought any token to the office? I deny that she offered a token as payment for the roof over our heads. The lawyer sat back like a man who believed he had already won and was now enjoying the pace toward the finish. Let us discuss your habit of keeping objects. You saved a broken compass. It still points. You saved a bent spoon. It fed men who needed it. You saved maps. They recall roads that do not exist anymore. Did you keep a field survey map from your unit? Walter paused. I kept what men entrusted to me. So yes. You may draw your own box, Walter said. I will not climb into it for you. The door opened. A clerk from records entered with a tube case and a metal clip. She was sworn in and sat at the far end. The lawyer turned his chair toward her. You are a custodian of county land records. Yes. You brought a chain of title map for the Kessler parcel. Yes. Please unroll it. She did. The map spread across the table with the smell of old paper. Lines marched across it. Angles marked. Boundary calls written in a hand from another era. The clerk placed a brass weight on each corner. The camera leaned forward as if it had a nose. Please identify the mark at this corner, the lawyer said. She touched a small square. That is a boundary stake location. The notation says, stake missing, refer to veteran field survey. And do you have that field survey? No, why not? It is not in the county archive. The reference note says it was retained by the unit survey team. The lawyer turned his gaze on Walter and smiled that thin smile again. So the county map is incomplete. It is complete as far as the county is concerned, the clerk said. It has a reference to an external survey, which you do not possess. Which we do not possess. The lawyer spread his hands in a gesture that tried to look like logic rather than trap. Mr. Kessler, do you possess the field survey? I possess memories of men placing stakes in winter, Walter said. If a paper existed, it existed for that work. Do you have it now? Walter did not answer. He watched the clerk, who watched the map the way a medic watches a patient without a pulse. The lawyer turned to the camera as if feeding it. Let the record reflect that the respondent refuses to answer the question about possession of the field survey. Walter spoke then, each word placed like a foot on a bridge with missing planks. Let the record reflect that you asked me to carry the weight of a file you lost. The lawyer ignored that. He pointed again to the letter from Walter's wife. Let us return to her line. Read it aloud, please. Walter read it. The words felt like a hand on his shoulder. I kept the metal safe for the house, and the house safe for the metal. The lawyer leaned in. When a person says a thing is safe for a house, that often means it secures the house. Would you agree? No, Walter said. It can mean the house holds the memory that gives the metal value. The phrase can still be read two ways. You can read a prayer as a tax return if you have the wrong light, Walter said. The lawyer did not blink. He fanned 3 photographs onto the table. One showed the drawer where Walter kept tax stubs. One showed a tin box with letters tied in string. One showed a barn shelf with a rusted lockbox. The angles were intimate. The eyes behind the lens had stood close. Did you consent to these photographs? He asked. No. The lawyer glanced at the court reporter, then at the camera. We will lodge a note that the firm lawfully obtained images through an inspector who assessed exterior structures. The barn shelf is not exterior, Walter said. The lawyer let the point pass as if it had not been spoken. Is the rusted lockbox your property? Yes. What is inside? Rust, Walter said. The clerk from records spoke for the first time without invitation. The chain of title map shows a gap here. She placed her fingertip between 2 boundary calls. Between the north fence and the irrigation ditch. The margin says confirm with field map. Without it, the parcel line cannot be fixed for modern survey. The lawyer nodded as if she had just translated for him. So without the field map, there is ambiguity. There is a gap, she said. Ambiguity is for judges. I only point at lines. The lawyer faced Walter again. If you have the field map, production would aid your own case. Production would give you time to cut it into pieces, Walter said. You would hold the corner you like and lose the corner you do not. Do you possess it? The lawyer pressed. I possess a reason not to answer, Walter said. The lawyer shifted to a softer tone, the soft that comes before a blade. You present yourself as a man of honor. You revere memory. You hide behind it. You keep objects. That is your nature. You call it keeping. Others would call it hoarding. A man who hoards will bring a trinket into a title if it helps him sleep. Walter met his eyes. A man who hoards lives afraid of empty space. I am not afraid of the room your words leave. The lawyer held up a hand. No more questions from me at this time. He turned to the clerk. One more for records. What steps would resolve the gap? Locate the unit field survey, she said. Or locate original witness stakes. Failing that, sworn testimony from 2 independent surveyors with reference to period photographs, which rarely exist for rural acres of this size. So the fastest path is the field map. Yes. Where is it? The lawyer asked, but the question was pointed at Walter. No one spoke. The clock on the wall clicked once, a tiny sound that still felt loud. The camera watched. The reporter's fingers rested. The lawyer changed chairs with a rustle and brought in a second deponent, a retired clerk with a memory that came and went like weak radio. The old man confirmed one thing that mattered. In the year of final confirmation, a woman had stepped to the counter with a medal in a small cloth roll. He could not swear that the cloth was opened. He could swear that she held it with both hands the way people hold things that are not money and matter more than money. Was the number written? The lawyer asked. I saw a pen, the old clerk said. I did not see the page. Did she pledge the medal? She did not speak in that currency, the clerk said. She spoke in names and dates. The lawyer gave up the old clerk as a poor tool and dismissed him. The room grew quiet again. The chain of title map lay like a patient under a sheet. The gap waited. The letter from Walter's wife lay beside it, the sentence like a blade that pointed 2 ways at once. The lawyer closed the binder and stacked the exhibits. This deposition will recess until tomorrow at 9. Respondent is reminded that failure to produce requested items will be noted for the court. Chair scraped. Lights buzzed. The camera's red dot went dark. The clerk from records slid the brass weights into her bag and rolled the map with care. She paused at the door and looked back at Walter, not with pity, but with a kind of respect. Sometimes a map is not paper, she said. Sometimes it is where a man remembers to walk. She left. The door shut with a soft click. The room felt larger now that the performance had ended. Walter stood slowly, bones careful, breath slow. He picked up his wife's letter and held it to the light. The last line glowed through the paper. He could hear her say it again. I kept the medal safe for the house, and the house safe for the medal. He folded the page and put it in his breast pocket near the place where the medal's weight sometimes lived. He touched the spot and felt the balance of both. Outside, the hallway smelled of coffee and rain. Far away, through glass, he could see the courthouse steps washed clean. Mason was not in sight. The judge's order still stood like a wall that moved closer each hour. He walked out with his hat in hand and the letter near his heart. Behind him, in a room that had learned to hold echoes, lay a map with a gap and a question that had begun to ask itself like a prayer. Where is it? The bailiff called the room to order, and the sound settled like dust. The judge looked over rimless glasses, the clerk lifted her pen, and the gallery leaned as one body. Walter stood at counsel table without counsel, hat on the chair, hands on the wood as if steadying a drifting deck. He felt the room measure him by age and posture and decided to let it, because time had already done worse. Call your witness, the judge said. The firm's lawyer did not waste time. Mason Coleman. The door at the back opened. Mason walked in with a clean shirt that did not hide the life under it. A dark line of oil lived along his thumb. His nails wore work like badges. He moved with care, not from fear, but from the weight of choice. Walter watched him cross to the stand and raise his right hand. Do you swear to tell the truth? The clerk asked. I do. State your name. Mason Coleman. The lawyer stepped close enough to share breath, but not enough to break the rules. Mr. Coleman, do you know the respondent, Walter Kessler? Yes. How did you meet? On County Road 21. I had a flat rear tire. He patched it. Did he ask for payment? No. Did he show you any object tied to his military service? Mason looked at Walter, then at the judge. I saw a medal when he closed his satchel. Did he speak about that medal? Yes. What did he say? A wire of silence stretched across the room. Mason held it in both hands. He said it had kept his house safe, Mason answered. A rustle slid through the benches. The lawyer smiled like a man who had heard a door open inside a locked house. Did he offer that medal as collateral in exchange for anything of value? The lawyer asked. The wire tightened. Walter kept his eyes steady. Mason breathed in through his nose, slow. He offered it as collateral for a favor. Gasps moved like a single breath, drawn by many mouths. The judge cut the air with a palm. Order. The lawyer angled his body toward the jury box that would exist at trial and toward the gallery that existed today. Described the favor. He said if I could help solve a tidal mess that was building against him, he would put the metal up to secure his word. Walter felt the room tilt, but he held the wood and let the tide run. The lawyer nodded as if pleased by a student who had memorized lines. Did you accept? No, Mason said. Why not? Because he was old, and I am not a thief. Ripples of sound again, smaller this time. The lawyer allowed them to die. Mr. Coleman, you have had contact with the petitioner's firm, he said. You have worn their crest. You have attended events under their banner. Correct. Yes. Have you provided information to them about Mr. Kessler? Mason did not blink. Yes. What information? That he held the metal. That it matched the number in their file. You saw the number. Yes. You related. Yes. The lawyer turned to the judge. Your Honor, this witness confirms both admission and collateral intent. Admission of possession, the judge said. Intent is a long road from possession. Then let us walk a few more steps, the lawyer said, turning back to Mason. After Mr. Kessler offered the metal, did he give any instruction regarding documents tied to his land? He spoke of old papers. He did not know where they were. Mason said. Did he mention a map? He said men had set stakes long ago. So no map. No map in his hand, Mason said. The lawyer paced 2 measured steps, the kind that draw lines for a jury that is not yet present. Mr. Coleman, did Mr. Kessler suggest that you should retrieve anything from his property without consent? No. Did he suggest a location where proof could be found? Mason paused. The pause felt like the turn of a key. He folded his hands to keep them still. He mentioned the cedar fence on the back acre, he said. The lawyer frowned, as if disappointed by a toy that made no sound. That is not precise. It was precise enough, Mason said. Your Honor, let the record reflect that the respondent spoke of a cedar fence as a source of proof and offered a medal as collateral for help. The lawyer said, facing the bench again. Walter watched Mason's jaw. A tendon moved once and went quiet, like a signal sent on a buried wire. The judge scribbled, then looked over the glasses again. Mr. Coleman, do you currently work for the petitioner? The judge asked. I do not draw a salary, Mason said. You act at their request. I rode in their company. I spoke in rooms they rent. That is an answer that says yes, the judge said. Yes, Mason agreed. The lawyer returned to the lectern. His tone now was soft, like a whetstone. One last area, Mr. Coleman. When Mr. Kessler offered the medal, what did he ask in return? He asked that I help him prove his boundary, Mason said. How? By finding something that would make the court stop calling him a hoarder, Mason said. The word hung. The lawyer decided not to touch it. He lifted a sheet. No further questions. The judge turned. Mr. Kessler, you may examine the witness. Walter stepped forward. He did not carry a binder. He carried a face that had watched winter leave and return many times. He placed his palms on the rail as if it were the hood of a machine that could still run. Mr. Coleman, he said, did I ever put that medal in your hand? No. Did I ever write a pledge, promise, or transfer on paper? No. Did I ask you to sign anything? No. Did I ask you to swear to any version of my past? No. Then the only thing you have is a sentence about safety and a guess about intent, Walter said. Mason nodded once. Yes. Walter tilted his head slightly. When we spoke at my table, did you tell me to keep the metal out of this building? Yes. Why? Because this building would hang a tag on it and call it theirs, Mason said. Did I agree? You did. Did I ask you for payment for the tire I fixed? No. Did I take anything from you? No. Walter turned one hand palm up, not as appeal, but as measure. Do you stand here today in clean hands? Mason looked down at his own. Grease lived in the lines. Ink lived at the edge of his thumb. He lifted his gaze. I stand here with both kinds of stain, he said. Walter let that sit. The judge watched with a face that did not tell stories. Walter took one more step. You said cedar fence, Walter said. If a man wished to walk there, which way would he turn from the back porch? Mason did not move his head, only his eyes. Left fork past the cedar fence, he said, plain as weather. The words fell like a coin into a slot that had waited for years. Walter heard them land inside a box buried under years of rain and roots. He remembered a night with a flashlight and a boy with a shovel and a captain who had said to hide what paper could not protect. He felt the map in his hands before it existed. The lawyer stiffened. "Your Honor, the witness is adding directions not in our motion." The judge held up a hand. "He is answering the question." Walter nodded as if thanking a man who had returned a tool borrowed long ago. He stepped back from the rail. "No further questions," he said. The judge looked down at his notes. "The witness may step down." Mason left the stand without looking left or right. He passed the counsel table and did not slow. At the aisle, he paused as if to tie a bootlace, then stood and left through the back door. The firm's lawyer watched him go with a face that did not know if it had won or lost. "Next witness," the judge said. But the room did not breathe the same. Something had shifted. Even the bailiff felt it and glanced toward the windows as if a sound had come from the fields. The rest of the morning slid by on paper. The lawyer spoke of liens and dates. The judge spoke of deadlines. The clerk marked exhibits. Walter answered what needed answers and saved the rest for the ground that remembers more than transcripts. When the gavel fell, the hall filled with the low murmur of people who had tasted smoke and wanted flame. Walter took his hat and moved down the steps into thin sunlight that tasted like water after salt. Mason waited near the curb, helmet under his arm, eyes on the sky. "You heard me," Mason said. "I did," Walter said. "Do not bring the metal," Mason said. "Bring a shovel." Walter looked past him toward the west, where the cedar line cut the horizon like a scar. "The left fork past the cedar fence," he said, as if repeating a hymn from a book he had not opened in years. "They will watch your door tonight," Mason said. "They will count the lights and call the judge if you breathe wrong." "Then I will breathe in the field," Walter said. Mason stepped closer, lowering his voice. "There is an ammo box under that cedar. Green paint, rust at the hinge, rope handle. It holds a wrap. The wrap holds a map. If the rain has not eaten it, the lines will still speak. If the lines speak, the chain breaks where they do not want it to." "And if the box is gone?" Walter asked. "Then I lied under oath, and you will hate me," Mason said. But I did not lie. He put on his helmet and swung a leg over the bike. The engine caught and settled to a patient pulse. He looked at Walter once more. "Left fork," he said. "Past the cedar fence," Walter finished. Mason rode away without show. Walter watched the taillight bend with the road and disappear. He turned the other way, toward home, toward the field, toward a cedar that had drunk rain for many winters and might yet give up what it had kept. By late afternoon, the sky grew heavy again, low and gray, a lid on a pot about to boil. Walter set a spade in the truck bed, slid the satchel under the seat, and drove the lane slow so the watchers would count him as ordinary. At the house, he did not park. He rolled past the porch, through the gate, along the ruts that farmers had used since mules did the work. At the fork, he turned left, not right, and let the truck idle near the fence where the cedar stood with its back to the wind. The ground there was stubborn, roots knit under the surface like wire. He set the spade and pressed with the weight that age had not stolen. The first cut gave only wet soil and a smell like old coins. The second cut struck wood. He cleared with his hands because fingers tell truth faster than steel. A corner showed. He wiped mud and saw green paint where the earth had not reached. He dug more, slow, careful, patient as if unwrapping a body. When the lid showed its hinge, he stopped and looked up. The field held its breath. The fence creaked once. Far off, a single engine turned on a road he could not see. He slid the box free and set it on the grass. The rope handle was brittle but held. He lifted the lid. Inside lay oilcloth, wrapped twice, tied with a string that had turned to something like straw. He loosened the knot. The cloth opened. A map looked back, lines crisp where the folds had protected them, ink dark enough to speak. He did not cheer. He did not pray. He only exhaled and felt the years move off his shoulders by inches. He folded the oilcloth back, closed the lid, and slid the box under the truck seat with the satchel. Then he brushed soil back into the hole with the side of his boot, erased his own marks with the flat of the spade, and stood very still. The left fork had kept its promise. The cedar had kept its watch. The night would come with questions. He now had an answer that did not need a microphone to be true. The clouds dragged low over the valley that night, fat with thunder, but holding back the strike. The field behind Walter's house glimmered faintly under a broken moon. He waited until every porch light along the lane went dark before stepping onto the gravel path. The cedar fence cut a black line against the sky, tall and stubborn, the same as it had looked half a century earlier when he had buried a secret there at someone else's command. A boy trailed behind him. Noah, the neighbor's son, 16, and still carrying the kind of strength that comes from not knowing what breaks you yet. Walter had asked him quietly that afternoon if he knew how to keep a secret. The boy had nodded. That was enough. Now Noah carried the shovel, swinging it lightly as they walked. "You sure it's out here, Mr. Kessler?" he whispered. Walter nodded. Sure enough to dig. They reached the cedar. Its branches swayed in the damp wind, shedding drops like breath. The earth there was darker, rich with decay and time. Walter set down his lantern, its light thin and gold, cutting a circle that caught their hands and the spade's blade. "Dig there," he said, pointing to the small patch where the grass grew uneven, as though the ground still remembered what it held. Noah pressed the spade into the soil. The earth gave with a soft sigh. They worked in silence, trading turns, each stroke releasing the smell of rain-soaked clay. The lantern flickered. Insects hummed, their rhythm lost to the wind. After half an hour, Noah struck something solid. The sound was low, hollow, metal meeting wood. He crouched, brushed dirt aside, and looked up. "There's a box down here." Walter knelt beside him. "Pull it up slow." They dug around the edges, freeing corners that resisted. The box emerged, green paint flaking, metal clasps turned the color of old pennies. Walter wiped the top clean with his sleeve. A faint set of stenciled letters still clung to it. Ammunition, property of U.S. Army Signal Unit. He smiled, faintly. Outlived the war. Outlived most men who packed it. "Looks heavy," Noah said. "It was meant to be," Walter replied. He unlatched the rusted clasps. They resisted, then yielded with a crack. The smell that rose was half earth, half memory. Inside lay oilcloth, folded with precision, corners tucked the way soldiers do when they expect inspection. Walter lifted it, hands shaking slightly. Beneath the cloth sat a smaller ledger, wrapped in wax paper. He unrolled the oilcloth first. A map unfolded, its ink faded but legible, lines drawn by steady hands. The cedar fence ran across its lower edge like a scar. Each parcel had initials beside it, small, neat, military. The one marked K8 bore his own. Noah whistled softly. "It's real. Real enough to end a lie," Walter said. He smoothed the creases. The boundary lines were clear. His land ended exactly where the firm claimed it began. Noah peered closer. "What's this note at the bottom?" Walter leaned in. "Survey authenticated and recorded by J.H. Pike, 1947. The signature was firm, deliberate, the kind of pen stroke that knows its authority. Pike. The name hung in the damp air like a verdict. Halbert and Pike. The very firm that stood against him now. The signature was not his. It was theirs. He felt his pulse quicken. The irony bit deep. The founder of the firm had verified the original survey that gave him this land. That signature made the entire case collapse. Walter sat back on his heels. They built their house on the same foundation they're trying to take from me. Noah blinked, not understanding. "So that's good. That's justice," Walter said, hidden under 50 years of rain. He reached for the smaller ledger. Its cover crackled as he opened it. Inside were lists, names of veterans, parcel numbers, service units. Each entry bore two initials beside it, one of a soldier, one of an officer. Near the back, his wife's name appeared, written in her careful hand. Received grant confirmation on behalf of W. Kessler. Witness J.H.P. Walter's throat tightened. His wife had stood for him that day, not to pledge the medal, but to complete the grant he could not sign himself. She had done what the law required, and they had twisted it into a chain. He closed the ledger, pressing his palm against its cover. The rain started then, first as mist, then as a steady whisper against the leaves. "We should go," Noah said. "Not yet," Walter said. "Help me take a picture." He handed Noah a small disposable camera from his coat pocket, one that still used film. The boy knelt and snapped 2 frames of the map, one of the signature and one of the ledger's page. "Good," Walter said. He folded the documents back into the oilcloth, sealed the box, and wiped his hands clean on his coat. "This goes to court tomorrow. If I'm not the one who carries it, you tell Deputy Lane where it sleeps. Left fork past the cedar fence. He'll know." Noah looked uneasy. "You think they'll come for it?" "They'll come for everything," Walter said. "That's what people do when they smell truth." Lightning blinked beyond the ridge. The thunder followed, close now. They carried the box to the truck and slid it beneath the seat, wrapping it in an old blanket. The storm broke open as they reached the house, fat drops hammering the roof, gutters roaring, windows rattling like chains. Inside, Walter poured 2 mugs of coffee. The boy sat by the fire, shoes steaming. The old man placed the ledger on the table and stared at the name at the bottom of the page. J.H. Pike. He spoke softly, almost to himself. He swore by that pen that every man on that map owned what he bled for. Then his sons built a firm to sell it back to us. Noah sipped the coffee, unsure what to say. What happens now? Now, Walter said. We let the rain wash the dust off the truth. Outside, water streamed down the windows in silver sheets. The cedar swayed, grateful for the drink. The storm would cover their tracks well. He turned to Noah. You did good tonight. Keep what you saw between us. One day, when you own something that men with papers want, remember, papers lie less than people, but they still lie. The boy nodded, eyes wide. I'll remember. Walter placed the ledger back inside the satchel, beside the medal, both symbols of battles fought and not yet finished. He reached for a sheet of paper and wrote one line in his old, deliberate hand. Proof rests beneath the cedar, signed by their own blood. He folded the note, slipped it into his pocket, and let his hand rest there, feeling the paper's edge like a pulse. The thunder rolled again, softer this time, moving east. The rain slowed to a whisper. Walter stood and looked out the window at the cedar fence. For a moment, lightning illuminated it, and the wet wood gleamed like iron. The box outlived the rain, he murmured. Now let's see if men can. He turned down the lamp. The boy fell asleep by the fire, shoulders slumped, head tilted toward the light. Walter watched him for a moment longer, then sat in the darkness. The map burned into his mind. Tomorrow, he would walk into the courthouse not as an old man defending a memory, but as a soldier carrying proof. The war had changed uniforms, but the enemy had kept its habits. Outside, the last drops fell from the cedar's branches onto the ground that had hidden truth longer than it should have. The earth was quiet again, satisfied for now. The night belonged to Walter, and to a box that had waited half a century to be found. Engines arrived like rain that had learned rhythm. No horn, no shout, just a rolling undertone that rose from the road and laid itself across the yard. Walter stepped onto the porch with his hat in his hand and felt the boards steady under his feet. The morning held a pale light, thin and cold, as if the sky had not decided yet whether to bless or judge. The final hearing sat a few hours ahead on the clock, but time felt like a rope that others held. They came in pairs, then fours, then a line that rounded the bend and kept rounding. 51 riders, helmets down, visors dark, jackets marked with patches that had meant one thing last year and a different thing today. The road filled and then hushed. Engines cut off one by one until the only sound was the ticking of hot metal and the slow push of wind across the cedar fence. No one spoke. It felt like a formation at a field grave, not a visit to a small house with peeling paint. Mason dismounted last. He lifted his helmet and hooked it on the handlebar. His face had the washed look of a man who had made a decision that cost him sleep and bought him a spine. He walked through the line without touching a shoulder or a mirror, and the riders opened a path without a word. He stopped at the steps and met Walter's eyes like a soldier greeting a flag. We are here to return something that left your hands when men were young, he said. The voice carried, not with volume, but with weight. He held out a wrapped package, cloth tied with a strip of canvas that had known mud and sun. Walter untied it with fingers that remembered knots. Inside lay a field compass set in brass, polished to a dull shine that spoke of care, not display. The bezel turned smooth. The needle steadied and pointed with quiet certainty. Beside it lay a key on a ring, heavy, square-shouldered, cut for a lock that did not belong to a modern door. Mason tapped the key once. Side yard garage, he said. The one you never used. No one has used it since my wife closed it, Walter said. She closed it because someone asked her to keep a door shut until the right morning, Mason said. We believe this is that morning. 2 riders peeled off without being told and rolled their bikes to the far edge of the yard where the grass gave way to hard-packed earth. Walter stepped down, compass in one hand, key in the other, and led the way along the path that skirted the garden. The side yard stood where the house met the slope, a low structure with a rusting tin roof and a wide, stubborn door. He had painted that door once in a shade his wife liked and had never painted it again, as if fresh color might break a promise. The lock waited under a small iron cover. He lifted the cover and saw the keyway, old and square. He fit the key. It met resistance, then turned with a deep, satisfying click. The door sighed inward an inch, and the breath of cool, stored air brushed his face. He pushed it wide and stepped into dust that had settled like a soft verdict on everything inside. The riders did not crowd him. They stood back at the threshold, boots lining the sill, hands quiet, eyes level. Walter blinked once to clear the dim, and then saw shape, then metal, then memory. A jeep sat in the center bay, olive paint new and honest, tires squared to attention, canvas top folded and tied, unit mark hand-lettered on the hood in white that cut through the gray of the space. The mark held his old unit code, the one he had mouthed like a prayer during nights when maps mattered more than sermons. He walked to the front and rested his palm on the hood. The paint held warmth even in the cool air. A faint smell of oil and leather rose. He ran his thumb across the unit mark as if verifying his own name. Someone had done this with love and knowledge. The seat canvas was pulled tight and stitched with even hands. The gear shift wore the right wear at the right place, not fake scuffs, but memory placed with skill. Mason stood off to one side. We rebuilt from a frame found in a salvage yard 3 counties over. The old number stamped through the rust. We matched parts to the list in your unit manual. We took our time. We did not leave our fingerprints where a judge could call them stories. Walter circled the Jeep once, slow. At the rear, a jerrycan sat clipped into its bracket. The strap had a new buckle, but an old sole. The tailgate chains hung with felt pads to keep them from clattering. He bent and looked under the dash. Wires lay clean. No amateur's nest. He saw a shallow cavity molded into the metal where the factory had left empty space. It looked like a mouth closed by design. He touched it with 2 fingers and felt a flex that should not have been there. There is a compartment, he said. Mason nodded. We built it back to spec, and then listened to an old mechanic who remembered that some units hid maps in that space. A small latch lives behind the ashtray. Push left, then up. Walter reached, found the edge, pushed left, then up. The dash clicked in a small, private way. A panel slid out an inch as if the Jeep itself had decided to cooperate. Inside lay a slim, oiled envelope folded tight, edges sealed against dust. He did not pull it yet. He let his hand rest on the metal and listened to the silence of 51 men holding breath. He slid the envelope free and set it on the seat. With a thumbnail, he broke the old seal. The paper inside had kept its shape. He unfolded it and found a brief note in tidy block print. The ink had not faded much. The words were simple. If you are reading this, the day has come. Leave the metal where pride lives. Carry proof where paper must bow. JHP. The initials hit like a hammer laid gently on the table. Pike again. The founder who had confirmed the field survey had left a message in a compartment no clerk would think to open. The man had once done a right thing and had hidden that truth in a place where a right hand might find it when needed. Walter lifted the note for light. The edges gleamed. He folded it and put it in his breast pocket beside his wife's letter. The 2 papers seemed to recognize each other and settle there without fight. He opened the envelope again and found a second item, a small brass tag stamped with the same metal number as his own, a tagsman's copy, the kind used to check equipment in and out during field operations. It was not the metal. It was a proof of identity made for men who had to move too fast to argue. He turned and faced the riders. This is not a gift, he said. This is a return of breath that old men lost and young men never knew they held. A murmur rolled through the line, not noise, but assent. Mason stepped closer, hands open. We cannot write for you, he said. We can stand outside while you speak. We can start engines when you come out. We can look like a storm a clerk does not want to walk through on his way to lunch. Walter smiled with half his mouth, the way men smile when they find a bone-deep truth and decide to carry it. Stand where you like, he said. I will carry this. He set the envelope and the compass on the passenger seat, then climbed behind the wheel. The seat caught him like an old chair. He pressed the starter. The engine turned once, twice, then caught and settled into that steady thrum that had once meant rescue, retreat, and stubborn life. The sound filled the garage and spilled into the yard. Helmets lifted. Heads turned toward the road like dogs catching scent. He eased the Jeep forward into daylight. The paint bore a thin film of dust that the light made beautiful. Outside, the riders formed two ranks without instruction. They left space ahead of the Jeep as if lanes had been painted for them by an unseen hand. Mason straddled his bike and kicked it alive. One by one, the line woke, 50 engines falling into a shared pulse that felt like a living thing. Walter killed the engine and let silence return for one beat. He looked down at the dash where the panel now hit its mouth again. He touched it once, a promise to open it only when the time said so. The compartment was a loop waiting to close, not today, but soon. He turned back to the porch and saw the empty frame through the open door. It looked different now, less empty, as if it had decided that space can be a picture when it holds the right story. He tucked the compass into his coat pocket and set the key on a nail by the garage door where his wife used to hang the broom. Some doors should stay open once they remember why they were closed. Mason raised 2 fingers. The line responded, helmets down, visors set. No slogans. No display. Just presence. The town car with tinted glass that had taken photographs 2 days ago rolled past the far bend, slowed, then moved on. Cameras love crowds until crowds refuse to dance. Walter climbed back into the Jeep and set his hands on the wheel. The leather felt new and true. He looked at the road, then at the sky, then at the fence that had kept watch over a buried box that outlived seasons and schemes. He nodded once. The first bike rolled, then the second, then the Jeep. Tires found the lane, gravel spoke, and the formation moved. Neighbors opened curtains and did not step outside. Dogs lifted heads and decided to be quiet. The procession reached the gate, turned to the main road, and took the line that led to the courthouse. No sirens, no flags, only the sound of machines that carry men and ideas, and the sense that paper inside a cool room was about to meet proof that had learned to breathe dust and rain. At the stop sign, Walter rested a palm on the dash where the hidden latch slept. He left it closed. Some truths travel better when they ride quiet until the right desk feels their weight. The Jeep idled smooth. The compass in his pocket pressed a circle against his chest. The brass tag in the envelope tapped once against the paper as if eager to be counted. The light turned. 51 riders and an old Jeep moved forward as one. The ride did not announce itself with words. It announced itself by refusing to be small. The courthouse waited ahead, a box of stone that believed it could contain any story. The morning answered with engines and a key and a needle that had not lost north. The dash kept its secret for 1 more hour, and the road kept its promise to carry them there. The last day began with clean light and a chill that made breath visible. Walter stepped through the courthouse doors with the ledger under one arm and the oilcloth roll tucked inside his satchel. He moved without rush. The hall smelled of polish and old paper. On the staircase landing, a deputy stood straighter than usual, as if a sound from outside had already reached his spine. Inside Division 2, the judge arranged pens in a row, then set both hands on the bench. The clerk stacked exhibits in neat towers. The firm's lawyer checked his tie and smoothed a page that did not need smoothing. The gallery filled, then settled. A low hum met the windows, faint at first, like a storm still choosing where to break. "All rise," the bailiff said. They rose, sat, and waited. The judge glanced at the thin file, and then at the thicker one the clerk had added since yesterday. "Call the matter," the judge said. "Kessler, land title, on for evidentiary review," the clerk read. Walter stepped to the respondent's table and set the ledger down with care. He unrolled the oilcloth halfway and let the map breathe across the wood. Lines met corners. Notes held their ink. At the bottom, a signature waited like a fuse. The lawyer stood at once. Objection to late exhibit. Foundation lacking. Chain of custody broken. Walter did not look at him. He kept his eyes on the bench. The map was drawn by my unit and authenticated in 1947. The ledger cross-references parcels and bears witness initials. "Your Honor," the lawyer said, "this man brings artifacts as if this is a museum. We require certified copies from a proper archive, not keepsakes dug from a garden." The judge lifted a hand. "Counsel will be heard, but the court will look." He motioned to the bailiff. "Bring them up." The bailiff carried the ledger and the map to the bench. The judge bent low, reading from the bottom edge upward, lips moving as he traced boundary calls. He reached the signature and stopped. His thumb rested on the name. J. H. Pike, he said. The name did not leave his mouth as a question. It left as a small acknowledgement that something larger than this room had just walked in. The lawyer forced a smile. A signature can be drawn by any hand. Then your own founder drew it well, the judge said without looking up. The style matches a dozen orders in this court's archive. He handed the map to the clerk. Mark this for identification and scan it. The sound outside rose by a notch, like wind approaching a line of trees. The judge flicked a glance at the windows. The glass trembled once, barely. Proceed, he said. Walter faced the bench. The parcel line stands where this map sets it. The ledger lists my wife as witness at confirmation. She did not pledge a medal. She carried my file because I was still under orders. The initials beside her entry matched the signature at the bottom of the map. The lawyer stepped to the lectern, voice clipped. Your Honor, even if the court indulges this theater, there is still the issue of the medal as collateral. We have testimony that he offered it to my witness. The hum deepened outside, steady and low. The judge kept his tone flat. The court recalls the testimony. It also recalls that the witness said he refused. Intent binds, the lawyer pressed. A pledge offered is a pledge made in equity. Equity is not a net for every fish, the judge said. Sit down. The lawyer stayed on his feet. There is also the sealed affidavit under Mr. Kessler's initials. I remember it, the judge said. It remains sealed unless this evidence requires a key. He tapped the signature again. So far, this looks like the key to something else. The courtroom door opened at the rear. Mason stepped inside, helmet in hand, a cable dangling from the chin bar. He did not hurry. He did not slouch. He waited until the bailiff noticed him, then nodded toward the monitor on the evidence cart. Your Honor, Mason said from the aisle, voice level. With the court's permission, I hold a short clip recorded on the day I met Mr. Kessler. It bears the timestamp and geotag. It shows the exchange about the medal. The lawyer snapped around. Your Honor, this is ambush. It is disclosure, Mason said. To both sides. The judge studied him. Approach. Mason walked the helmet forward, set it on the cart, and connected the cable. The bailiff pulled the monitor around so the bench could see. The judge nodded. Play it, he said. The screen lit with shaky road and falling dusk. A bike leaned on a shoulder. A small figure crossed the frame with a satchel that belonged to another era. The audio caught wind, and then words. That tire does not need a truck, Walter said on the clip. It needs hands. The scene moved through the patch, the bent rim, the careful turn of a wrapped wrench. The camera lived at Mason's chest, angled low. It caught the satchel closing on a dull glint. It caught a sentence clear enough to hang a life on. If you start paying for help, you will forget what it means to give it, Walter said. Mason's voice on the clip replied. Why are you helping me? Because once, someone helped me, Walter said. The clip ended. The room held still. The judge sat back and let the quiet settle. The hum outside washed against the glass and stayed there, a long-held note. The lawyer tried to recover. This does not address later intent. It addresses character, the judge said. And it supports the respondent's claim that he did not barter his past to secure his roof. Mason spoke again, calm. I testify that no pledge was accepted and that he turned down payment. I testify that the firm asked me to wear their crest to gain access to his life. I wore it until I learned what their paper planned to do. The judge looked at the lawyer. Cross if you wish. The lawyer walked halfway down the aisle and stopped, as if a thin wire had caught his ankle. He spread his hands in an empty gesture and turned back. No questions. The judge gestured to the clerk. Mark and admit the clip. The clerk nodded, fingers already moving. Now, the judge said, to the map and ledger. He turned pages, then set both items side by side. We have a chain of title map authenticated by the signature of your firm's founder, placing the northern line where the respondent says it lies. We have a ledger entry showing the respondent's wife as witness, countersigned by the same hand. We have a county map with a gap that these papers fill. We have a video that speaks to conduct. He looked up. The injunction rests on quicksand unless you can show this court why I should ignore the stamp of the man whose name is on your own letterhead. The lawyer swallowed the answer he wanted to give. Your Honor, the court cannot accept documents pulled from a field as superior to certified records. The county map points to the very survey you now dismiss, the judge said. And the signature at the bottom belongs to your ancestor in interest. If there is fraud, The trail will lead through your attic, not his barn. A ripple of sound rose from the hallway. The bailiff cracked the door and looked out. Engines idled in the street, 51 strong, lined along the curb in a formation that spoke of respect rather than menace. Helmets faced the facade. Hands rested on bars. No one shouted. No one moved. The judge watched the bailiff's face and nodded once. Closed the door. He turned back to the room and let a small pause lengthen. They can wait outside. The law will work inside. That is the arrangement that keeps a county whole. Walter stood with his hands folded. He did not glance toward the windows. He already knew the sound. It had carried him here. The judge set his pen down. Petitioner's motion for an injunction is denied. The court accepts the map and ledger for purposes of boundary confirmation and orders a survey to match the unit marks. The court further orders production of any firm archive bearing the signature J.H. Pike related to Veteran Grant Series 41. If those papers contradict what I see, we will reconvene. If they do not exist, I will sign a quiet title order that will not be easy to pry up. The lawyer tried one last time. Your Honor, the medal is not here, the judge said. This ruling does not turn on trinkets. It turns on lines and names. A breath moved through the gallery. It sounded like hope that had learned to keep its voice low. Mason picked up the helmet and glanced at Walter. Walter gave a small nod that said enough. The judge tapped the map signature one more time, then pushed both exhibits toward the clerk. Mr. Kessler, he said, you will coordinate with the surveyor the court appoints. If any party tries to touch that fence without order, call Deputy Lang. This bench will defend the ground until ink catches up. Walter inclined his head. Understood. The gavel fell once. Not loud. Final enough. They filed out past wooden pews and polished rails. In the hall, the low rumble outside thickened. When Walter stepped onto the top step, helmets turned in unison. No cheer rose. No chant. Only the click of stands and the soft clatter of chains as men made room for an old Jeep that had waited years to see daylight under the right sky. Mason reached him first. You carried it, he said. We carried it, Walter replied. They stood a moment and let the sound of engines fill the space where fear had lived. The town car with tinted glass sat 2 blocks down and did not move. A single crow crossed the street and landed on the courthouse sign as if staking a small claim of its own. Walter placed the compass on the Jeep's dash and set the brass tag in the tray. The hidden latch behind the ashtray waited, quiet and patient. He left it closed. The day still had one more shape to make before the secret inside would be needed again. Behind them, the clerk walked to the door and watched the line with a face that had learned something about weight. She held the map copy under one arm, the ledger copy under the other. She lifted her chin toward Walter in a small salute that did not belong to any club. Engines rose as one, then fell to idle. Men waited. The law had spoken. The street had listened. The story began to move from rumor to record, which is where stories go when they are ready to stop bleeding and start living. The order arrived on paper that looked calmer than the room felt. The judge signed without flourish and spoke in a tone that let no one pretend to misunderstand. The claim failed, the injunction died, and the court referred the firm for sanctions tied to archive access and misrepresentation. No one gasped. The silence held like a sheet stretched tight over a bed that would not see sleep for a while. The clerk gathered the ledger copy and the scanned map, eyes steady. The bailiff opened the door, and daylight slid in with the thin chill of a town that had decided to watch itself. Walter stepped out first. The air tasted clean. He could hear the engines before he could see faces. 51 riders idled in a formation that showed respect by how still it could stand. The street had turned into a kind of chapel made of sunlight, fuel, leather, and breath. Helmets lifted when he reached the steps. Hands rose, not to salute exactly, but to acknowledge a weight shared. Mason moved to meet him with the helmet still in his hand, cable coiled now, visor up so that the truth on his face did not have to push through glass. He spoke softly, for Walter alone, though the engines carried the outline of his words farther than he intended. They are sending the firm to the board, Mason said. That buys time and makes truth louder when it reaches paper. Walter nodded once. No victory pose, no smile designed for a camera lens. Just that single nod, slow, as if he had set down a heavy thing and wanted to make sure it would not roll back on his toes. The riders closed the distance in a way that did not crowd. Four men stepped forward. Their jackets bore patches that meant more to them today than yesterday. They made a platform of their arms, and Walter let them lift him with care that did not insult his bones. He set his boots on the Jeep's running board and climbed in behind the wheel. The compass on the dash looked like it had always lived there. The brass tag in the tray clicked once against the plastic as if to count the moment. Mason climbed onto the Jeep's side step and spoke over the idling engines. "You all know why we came." This man fixed a tire for a stranger. He kept a medal because it had a job. He carried a map because paper forgot where it put the truth. "We are not here to scare a courthouse. We are here to witness that a line on the ground is real." The men did not cheer. Cheering would have broken the work they had done by simply being present. They let the sound sit, steady and low, like a promise that chooses to breathe rather than shout. A deputy crossed the street and gave a brief sign that said the path was clear. The town car with tinted glass had already turned a corner and left as if it had important places to be that did not include daylight. Walter looked at Mason. Mason looked back with eyes that carried sleep, road, fear, and relief all at once. "I rode with them to learn what they planned," Mason said under his breath. "I put my name on the witness list to get into a room where the sealed docket lived. The clerk would not let me see the affidavit, but the index gave me the number. Left fork past the cedar fence was the only line I could send without lighting a fire in their office." Walter held his gaze. "You chose a road that did not want you." "I chose a road that would get me to the box," Mason said. "I am sorry I let the pledge line stand in that first answer. It was the only way to keep my seat and keep them looking at me while I found a way to speak plain." "You spoke plain when it mattered," Walter said. Mason let the words sink and then moved off the step. He swung a leg over his bike and set his helmet. The line adjusted itself by inches. A deputy raised 2 fingers. Engines rose. The procession moved without a horn. The Jeep took the center as if a space had been waiting all morning for that exact shape. They did not race. They rolled. Windows along the street opened a few inches at a time. A child lifted a hand and lowered it when his mother put a palm on his shoulder. The courthouse doors closed behind them with a soft thud. The clerk stood in the vestibule holding the map copy and watching the line until dust and light swallowed it. They reached the lane that led to Walter's gate. The cedar fence waited like a veteran that had not left its post. The garage door stood open, key on the nail, dust line on the floor cut by new tire tracks. The riders parked in a careful arc. The air smelled of cut grass, warm oil, and a faint sweetness the house had kept since the days when bread cooled on the sill. Mason killed his engine and took off the helmet. He walked to the Jeep and rested his arms on the door. He spoke so that all could hear, though the tone felt private. "You won the paper fight," he said. "Now sign what keeps the next fight from starting." Walter reached into the satchel and pulled out a thin folder he had placed there before dawn. The deed inside belonged to the same county that had tried to forget its own map. He laid it on the hood and uncapped a pen that had written names for 70 years and refused to run dry out of spite. "The land fed us and held us," he said. "It should keep doing that when I am gone." He looked at Mason, then at the riders, then at the house. "I will make 2 gifts. One is for men and women who served and came home to find the ground under them priced like trophies. The other is for hands that want to learn without being told they're worth lives in a suit." He signed in a hand that time had made deliberate. The first document transferred 10 acres along the north line to a veterans trust that a local judge would oversee with strict rules. No sale, only lease to those who needed soil, shelter, or shop space at terms that answered to weather and real wages. The second document placed the house and the side yard garage in a community trust meant to become a working shop for young mechanics. Tools would live there. Old engines would return to sound. Papers would be filed by people who cared about grease under nails and promises that kept. A notary from the deputy's office stepped forward, stamp in hand. She had followed at a distance because someone had called ahead. She witnessed, stamped, and initialed with eyes that did not blink much. The riders watched in stillness that had its own heat. Mason took the folder when Walter handed it over and passed it to the deputy. The deputy tucked it into a leather pouch and tapped it once with a finger. "Filed before sundown," she said. "No one will pry that loose without a storm big enough to move the courthouse itself." The mood shifted then, not to noise, but to relief that soured a little at the edges because men who ride know that nothing holds forever. Someone brought a crate of soda bottles and a bag of sandwiches that had come from a diner that chose sides years ago and never apologized. Laughter found its footing. Tales escaped in short bursts. The sun slid a little lower. Walter sat on the Jeep's step and watched faces open a fraction at a time. He saw a scar on one man's jaw that told a story about metal and night. He saw ink on a woman's wrist that drew a line to a name under a date. He saw Mason take a half step back from the crowd, as if to check the corners and the approaches, the habit of a man who had served without ever wearing a uniform that made him easier to count. Noah came down the lane on his bicycle, standing on the pedals with the loose power of a boy who had not learned to ration strength yet. He braked hard, put a foot down, and tried to act as if 51 bikes and an old Jeep were normal. Walter waved him in. The boy grinned, and then turned serious. "You did it," Noah said, eyes bright. "We did what the ground told the paper to do," Walter said. He pointed to the garage. "You will work in there before the month ends. Bring your friends. Bring your mistakes. Leave with the sound of a clean idol in your ears." Noah swallowed hard and nodded. He would not cry in front of this many jackets. He would save that for a quiet corner. As afternoon edged toward evening, the riders began to prepare to leave in small groups. They had jobs and families and debts and engines that needed new plugs before another long run. Mason lingered. Walter took the metal from the satchel and weighed it in his palm. The ribbon felt less fragile than his memory of it. He looked at the empty frame through the open door and felt no need to fill it yet. He walked to the Jeep and opened the door. He reached behind the ashtray and found the latch. The panel slid with that private click. He placed the metal inside and set the pike note beside it. He looked at the brass tag and left it where it lay, because a tag is meant to be counted in the open. He closed the panel and pressed it until the latch caught. He stood for a moment with his hand on the dash. Mason watched, understanding that men sometimes need to hold on to metal not for the shine, but to feel a pulse that does not come from flesh. As the last bottles clinked and the last wrappers rustled, the line began to form again. Helmets went on. The deputy secured the deed pouch in the Jeep's glove box to carry to the recorder before sundown. Noah stood near the garage with his hands on his bike grips, knuckles white, as if holding on made the day stay. Walter climbed into the Jeep and checked the dash. The panel sat flush. The compass pointed where it should. He pushed the starter. The engine answered. He let it run and listened to the beat settle into the kind of steady that makes time feel like it is keeping the right score. Then Mason frowned. He leaned in through the open window. "Where is it?" he asked, voice low. Walter followed his eyes to the dash. He pressed the latch and opened the panel. The envelope still sat where he had placed it. The pike note touched its edge. The brass tag rested in the tray. The metal was not there. For a breath, nothing moved. Then he saw a smaller envelope under the first, thin, tucked, almost shy. He lifted the top envelope and found the second. He slid a finger under the flap and pulled a folded strip of paper free. It held a single line written in block letters, property of those who stood and never asked why. He read it twice. Mason read it with him. Noah craned his neck and read over the door. "The trust," Mason said. "The trust," Walter answered. The note did not feel like theft. It felt like a hand taking weight, because that is what hands are for. He pictured a rider moving quiet, the way a medic moves at night, not to steal, but to place objects where they belong. He closed the panel and left the note in his pocket. The brass tag he left visible, not as bait, but as the kind of proof that reminds a man that counting is honest when it starts in the right place. The riders understood something had happened because the air changed, not in fear, but in that way sound changes when a plan clicks. No one asked what had gone missing. No one asked who had moved it. The story had written its own next line, and men who live on engines know how to respect a line once it proves itself. Mason stepped back and swung onto his bike. He met Walter's eyes, helmet still in his hand. "You gave the land to the right names," he said. "The metal found its way to the right hands." Walter looked at the house, then at the garage, then at the fence. "Metal is for men," he said. "Ground is for everyone." The engines rose, not loud, but strong. The line rolled toward the road. The Jeep followed. Neighbors came to porches again and washed without waving. A dog barked once and then lay down. The sun dropped behind the ridge and pulled a long rope of shadow across the lane. At the stop, Mason pulled alongside the Jeep and tapped 2 fingers on the dash near the hidden panel. "If you ever need that space again," he said. You know where it is. It will hold what needs to wait, Walter said. They turned toward town one last time, not to fight, but to file. The deputy peeled away at the recorder's office with the deed pouch. Door already open, lights already on. The trust would be inked by nightfall. The garage would become a place where young hands learned to make machines honest. The North Line would hold for men who had learned to sleep on ground that did not move under them unless rain asked it to. When the line thinned and the road widened, Mason raised his hand in a small farewell. Walter lifted his palm from the wheel for a second and set it back. The Jeep hummed. The compass aimed. The tag gleamed. They reached the bend. Mason took the right fork toward the highway. Walter took the left toward the cedar fence. He drove slow along the posts that had watched him hide and dig and sign and let go. He stopped at the spot where the box had slept. He cut the engine and listened to the evening settle. Crickets took over where engines left off. The fence creaked once and went still. He spoke into the quiet without raising his voice. It belongs to those who stood, he said. Let it do that work. He sat until the sky lost its edge and the first stars picked at the dark. Then he turned the key and let the Jeep answer. On the way back to the house, he looked through the doorway at the empty frame. It still held nothing. It also held the story. He decided to leave it that way. Space is a kind of truth when it waits with purpose. Noah's bicycle leaned against the garage wall. A single wrench lay on the bench as if a hand had promised to return. Walter parked and shut off the engine. The night kept his secrets and gave him the ones he needed. The metal had gone where it could not be turned into a lever against him. The land had gone where it could not be cut by men who mistook a ledger for a heart. He closed the garage door halfway and left it like that, an invitation and a warning both. He walked to the porch, set the compass on the sill, and slipped the note from his pocket into the hidden dash panel before closing it again. He went inside. The house sighed. The floor held. The kettle would sing in a minute. The day had ended in ink, oil, dust, and quiet, which is the way good days end when they have done their work.